Hit it? Okay, so stand up here.
Get in close. Good morning. I will give some opening comments. My name is Chris Smith. I'm from New Jersey. I'm in my 43rd year as a member of Congress. I'm chairman of the Congressional-Executive Commission on China. And before we kick off the press conference, I would like to introduce one of our commissioners, Congresswoman Steele, who has to go and testify herself in about 10 minutes or 15 minutes, so I'd like to yield to her.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know what? Under his leadership, we are really growing we are actually gathering a lot of information regarding China. China is the biggest threat to not just the United States, but all over the world. And then APEC meeting, I was so disappointed that how can you bring China and put red carpets for their leader, that who is our biggest enemy? You're supposed not do that. They're stealing over $600 billion intellectual properties every year from the United States. And they're the one trade manipulation, so they try to avoid the tariffs. And they're the one actually using military to take over Taiwan. And you are giving Chinese leader red carpet. And I think they should invite Taiwanese President Tsai, and they should give a double red carpet. This is just almost obnoxious, and we really have to know who's our enemies and who's our allies are, especially those human rights violations. We've been learning so much. Chairman Smith knows exactly for the last 43 years he's been leading. I'm only baby. I'm a sophomore in Congress, and my both parents fled from North Korea, so I know how communism is doing awful things, and we really have to stop. It's a reason, and I really applaud our chairman that does a great job for this commission, and I am just so happy to see all of you. We all stand up. We relay the message, strong message to China. Stop human rights violations and stop trying to take over all over the world. To do that, our administration has to be really strong. We have to have very strong defense here, and we have to work with our allies, and we support and we protect our allies. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you so much. Thank you, Chairman. I have actually testimony at one of the committees, so I have to run, but I love to meet all of you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. What a great leader and what a wonderful advocate for human rights. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for your comments. Good luck with your testimony. I want to thank all of you for coming today. As always, with our work on the Commission, it is unfortunate we must hold such events due to the utter evil committed, especially by Xi Jinping, as he commits genocide, as he uses torture, and every other human rights abuse imaginable against the wonderful people of the People's Republic of China. It is, we stand with the oppressed, not with the oppressor, and far too many in this town and in Europe, as well as throughout this country, and Democrats and Republicans far too often pay lip service to the gross human rights abuses that are being committed each and every day, and we need to speak out even stronger. I'm outraged, as I think many of you are, and certainly that transgressions that have been committed in our country, we all remember when Erdogan came in from Turkey a couple of years ago, and there were peaceful protesters outside his embassy. And his thugs beat those people horribly, right in plain view. This is far worse than that ever was, even though that was outrageous. Last month, as foreign leaders descended upon San Francisco for the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, dozens of advocacy groups who showed up to peacefully protest Xi Jinping's participation in ruthless human rights abuses. They had every right to do so, and I applaud them for utilizing their First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and assembly to speak out against the most ruthless of tyrants. However, these basic civil rights were violated for many of these brave protesters. Counter-protesters, voicing support for General Secretary Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, violently attacked many of these activists and harassed countless others. And we know they weren't there on their own volition. They were there on behalf of the government of China. on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. Many reported being attacked by metal rods, flagpoles, umbrellas, and pepper spray. Diaspora groups such as Students for a Free Tibet documented some of these horrific acts, while some of their phones were stolen and tossed into nearby water because they contained the evidence of these atrocities. Stories like these and many others continue to be released as victims summon the courage to speak out. And we always know when someone speaks out and they have family who are still in China, they run a grave risk of retaliation against their family members. So that is especially incredible bravery when they do that and speak out. On top of all of this, the reports of San Francisco Police Department's apparent lack of action against these heinous attacks is deeply, deeply troubling. These human rights advocates came to peacefully protest utter atrocities with the belief that they would be safe to do so within the United States of America, and yet they were essentially left alone to be attacked and absolutely no support during or after the fact. Even more concerning, however, are claims from advocacy organizations such as Human Rights in China that the attackers may have ties to the Chinese consulate or police, raise concerns about official CCP support for these attacks. And of course, it's hard to get that evidence, but it couldn't be clearer. These claims, as well as non-responsiveness of the San Francisco Police Department, they are, I'm sure, under orders from above, must be investigated, as this marks an escalation of flagrant transnational repression on the United States soil. As an aside, I note that some have called for the opening of the PRC to consulate in Houston to show, quote, goodwill towards China. That consulate was closed because it was the nexus of transnational repression. And with people like Bob Fu, and I was with him, of all things, over the weekend in Texas, Bob Fu of China Aid being harassed in his home. Such calls for reopening are at best tone deaf and at worst outright appeasement in the face of what happened in San Francisco. It is also important to note that these attacks are, unfortunately, not unique. As we've seen from our continued work on this issue on the Commission, including our hearings on transnational repression, which I chaired in September, the CCP is notorious for its harassment and attacks against diaspora communities and dissidents outside of its borders. They attack families of persecuted Uyghurs and Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and who fled in search of free society and human rights they expect to get here. Journalists who bravely report on the atrocities occurring at the hands of the CCP, and even politicians who speak out and vote against the CCP. Their methods are vast and sophisticated, and as we have seen from the last month's events, those in the U.S. are not immune to these attacks. A recent report by Safeguard Defenders highlighted another concerning practice of the PRC to impose control over and incite fear among their diaspora communities. Despite clear warnings from G7 leaders only 1 month prior, China's Ministry of Justice issued new regulations this year encouraging the continuation of, quote, consular volunteer, quote, unquote, networks. These networks are directly tied to the CCP's United Front and pose real threats to the safety of Chinese dissidents, such as volunteers, have access to private data and can carry out tasks with the support of the state apparatus behind them. These networks are in clear violation of the Vienna Convention on Consular and Diplomatic Relations and are a brazen attempt of the CCP to use extraterritorial to control its people beyond the borders. As I have said many times in the past, something must be done to counter these ever-growing efforts by the CCP to repress opposing voices. I've introduced legislation in the Senate. Senator Merkley introduced it there to take concrete steps to address the issue of transnational repression, introducing in both of our chambers the Transnational Repression Policy Act. It is my sincere hope that this bill will be voted on promptly to become law and hold foreign governments accountable for their actions. Similarly, I've also introduced a bill to revoke, and I've been joined by my friend and colleague, Mr. McGovern. It's a bipartisan bill to revoke the privileges and immunities of the Hong Kong economic and trade offices in the United States. It's already been marked up in committee. It passed unanimously. Hopefully it'll be on the floor any day now. Since such offices no longer represent a free and open Hong Kong, but one that's increasingly under the CCP control. You know, we knew that Xi Jinping was looking to take and to ruin the great oasis of freedom called Hong Kong. I introduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act in 2014. And all the China hands here in Washington kept saying, don't worry, that's never going to happen. The basic law and the Sino-UK treaty will prevail, and there's no way he's going to take away this. He did, and he did it. We passed it. It became law. Marco Rubio was the Senate sponsor. I was the House sponsor. But it was so late that it didn't have the impact that it could have had. It still has good parts to it, but it is a missed opportunity. What we're trying to say now with this Hakido legislation is that we got to take away that malign influence that they are imposing again on the diaspora here, the students, human rights organizations, and all of the. I went and read all 3 of their websites, cover to cover. It took me hours. I couldn't believe how they were defending the national security law in Hong Kong, saying what a great law it is. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's a draconian law used to ensnarl anyone, including great people like Jimmy Lai. And you might recall, many of you, we had his son, Sebastian Lai, come and testify. What a tremendous individual he is, calling for the freedom and the release of his father, who is being prosecuted under that national security law. In defiance of the CCP, let me just say, first we have today to speak to you, and I do hope members of the press will amplify their messages more than anything. Zhou Fengsuo, a 1989 Tiananmen student leader and executive director of human rights in China, an advocacy group that has been critical in raising the issue of transnational repression to the public, especially following the events at APEC. As a lifelong human rights and democracy leader, I look forward to his thoughts and his recommendations. And again, I do hope the press will amplify this outrage that is occurring right within our own borders. Then we'll hear from Anna Kwok, who's the executive director of the Hong Kong Democracy Council, a nonprofit organization in support of Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement and Hong Kongers in the United States. The Hong Kong government, under the influence of the CCP, as we all know, issued a warrant for her arrest in July of this year, ramping up transnational repression efforts against her. Anna was severely targeted both before and during the APEC protests, online and in person. Thank you, Anna, for your incredible bravery as well. We will then hear from Pema Doma, Executive Director for the nonprofit advocacy group Students for a Free Tibet. Students for a Free Tibet, as I think many of you know, was very active in the anti-Xi Jinping protests in San Francisco. It was also targeted quite publicly on various fronts. We look forward to hearing these accounts from the executive director in this. Then we'll hear, and we've been joined by Elfidar, who's the president of the Uyghur-American Association, and she has testified before our commission in the past. I'm grateful, we all are on the commission, for her commitment to speaking out on behalf of all the Uyghurs in China, and appreciate her ability to be here today. And she'll talk about the attack she witnessed in San Francisco last month. Finally, we will hear from Caillou Lang, who suffered attacks while in San Francisco. Police department did nothing, and even after he identified his attackers, still did nothing, and have done nothing to this day. Again, I don't think it's the police officer or the detective on the beat. They were under instructions, and we got to get to the bottom of this. We're going to be sending a letter to the Justice Department, to our Attorney General. We want answers. I mean, these are the best and the bravest and the brightest, and they're being so horribly mistreated. And again, I'll just say finally, parenthetically, how disappointed I and so many were to see so many of our businessmen and women, the icons of industry, paying exorbitant sums, in some cases $40,000, to sit at the table with Xi Jinping, a man who should be at The Hague under charges of committing genocide and crimes against humanity, not being feted the way they did. It was outrageous. And it continues an appalling enabling that goes back to Tiananmen Square. And I could get into that a little bit later, because I was there right after Tiananmen Square and saw our businessmen kowtowing to the Chinese dictatorship.
Thank you so much, Chairman Smith. Your words means a lot to us. Since the attacks on APEC, I have been hearing lots of disheartening briefings from the Chinese community, and some of them who were relieved last few years, again, are scared of their own safety here. They are afraid to face the police, even when they are attacked. They are afraid to talk to press because their family back in China will be in trouble. That's why it's so important to have this meeting here today. And we are honored to have these people among us. Zhang Kaiyu, who was ambushed while leaving the protest. He will tell his story. I think that's the most important story today. And also we have a few people who were there. They were attacked. And some of them were attacked many times within the last few years, repeatedly, in New York, in San Francisco. And some of them were beaten as political prisoners in China, and now they are beaten here again in America. This is what we are facing. This is why we must speak up and fight back. My name is Zhou Fengsuo. I'm currently Executive Director of Human Rights in China. I organized some of the protests in San Francisco Bay Area, including a flying banner over the sky that says, "Free China, free Hong Kong, free Tibet, free Uyghur." And we are glad to stand with our other sisters and brothers from these communities here today. Before and after APEC, we've been constantly in contact with these people on the ground, collecting information. I can share with you some of their stories. We have a briefing already on our website and Substack, and we can connect you with these victims if you want to know any details. To summarize, between November 14 and November 17, more than 2,000 CCP supporters crowded San Francisco streets, viciously attacked at most a few hundreds of protesters of Xi Jinping. Dozens were beaten, more than 10 bloodied. About 5 people sent to hospital. Actually, one person couldn't come today because he had to see emergency doctor. He's still suffering, and he's in dangerous condition because of the attacks. And he's worried about whether he could get insurance to cover his bill. These pro-CCP groups were flying from as far as New York City with some well-known CCP supporters leading the charge. They direct these people to use flagpoles to cover the protesters and to attack these protesters. And they identify themselves with red scarf and red headbands all over. And some of them look like they are military trained. And these people who ambushed Zhang Kaiyu, they reacted when he said, "Fuck CCP, fuck Xi Jinping." That's why we believe they are associated with CCP's embassy and the consulates here in the United States. We also have a video evidence from one of the students who was with a group that the Chinese embassy bussed in from as far as Los Angeles. We have all this evidence. I can just name these examples for now, but dozens of Hong Kong, Tibetan, and Vietnamese protesters were also forcefully attacked from CCP supporters. My Tibetan friend Chimi Lamo was hit on the head many times. Her phone robbed. She is still suffering from lingering symptoms from the attacks, even today. Falun Gong protectioners held anti-CCP signs and intentionally stayed away from the pro-Xi crowd. However, they were chased after and then deliberately attacked. When I heard about all this violence towards human rights defenders in San Francisco, and I heard witnesses describe the way San Francisco police stood by and watched, I was saddened but not surprised, because I have been attacked like this for many times in San Francisco in the past decades. The last time it was the Olympic torch when it was passing San Francisco Bay Area. I was attacked and beaten while San Francisco police was watching. I asked them whether they have given up this space for pro-CCP supporters. They said no. I said, this is American ground. You must protect me. San Francisco police just shrugged and stood by watching. That's exactly what these people are facing today. Why it is so important to talk about transnational repression now? Because we do not want this to happen again. We are alarmed that these are transpiring now, while United States is slowly but surely waking up to the threats of transnational repression from communist China in the US. I also want to emphasize that the violence at APEC was not isolated to the attacks on the ground. Before the summit in San Francisco, I spoke with at least 3 people who confirmed to me they received calls from their family back in China, warning them not to participate. While the violent attacks were going on in San Francisco, Chinese police in China beat Sun Lin, a citizen journalist in Nanjing, to death in his home because he was tweeting about what's happening in San Francisco Bay Area. After the summit, up till today, dozens of my contacts are still receiving calls from Chinese police warning them not to talk about what happened, not to show up. That's why I respect these people who show up today, because it takes so much courage to face the retaliation. CCP uses violence as a tool because they want to intimidate us, they want to silence us, and they do not want our voice to be heard. They do it because they can, with the help of the negligence from law enforcement on the ground. If they can harm us like this, they can do this to everyone in this country. If we let them go away with these attacks, they will repeat it in the future to anyone in the United States. That's why we will not be silenced. We will stand firm and we will speak up. The CCP cannot be allowed to violently silence free speech here. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Smith, friends at the CECC, and friends from the media. I'm Anna Kwok, the Executive Director of the Hong Kong Democracy Council. Sorry, 1 second. Today, I will share my experience last month in San Francisco during the APEC meeting. As some of you know, for background information, I am one of the 8 Hong Kongers currently with a 1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty on my head. And with that, naturally, I am susceptible to the kind of harassment and assault through transnational repression happening on American soil. But nothing really stood out as much as what I experienced and what I saw last month in San Francisco. Last month, on November 11th, the Saturday before APEC, I announced my arrival in San Francisco on X, which is also known as Twitter. On my post, I invited the public to join our protest to rise against Xi. Approximately 12 hours after the post, I started receiving rounds of comments from pro-Beijing accounts that threatened my physical safety. One of the comments says, "Can somebody drop her unconscious body at the Chinese consulate and Chinese embassy?" The other comment says, "Be careful. This could be your last protest. A million can do wonders." Following the sudden rise in online harassment, I immediately contacted the FBI to file a report. Congressional allies like the CECC and the State Department were also notified of the situation. However, nothing immediate could be really done to discourage further online harassment that I've been seeing. So during the week of APEC, as I was calling protesters to join us outside St. Regis Hotel, that was where Xi met with business leaders who were paying $40,000 a seat to be with him. I was cyber harassed again. These cyber harassments started pouring again, with someone writing this time, "I do want the $1 million reward, as I will first tie you up with ropes, then send you to black market, or I will send you back to Hong Kong myself." Fortunately, none of our worst imaginations happened. I did not get kidnapped, and I was not beaten by anyone. As you can see, I'm still in one piece right now. But that was only because our Tibetan allies and fellow Hong Kongers constantly tried to protect me from the pro-CCP scene. My heart still aches for those who were beaten to severe injuries that we have seen over that week. Throughout the few days of protests, we would see thugs who were part of the pro-Beijing protester collectives carrying metal poles around with the intent to intimidate and assault. They would drag these long metal poles along the walkway so they would generate the screeching sound to intimidate minors and women in our protest marches. And of course, these posts were not only meant for show, they were actually used to also attack other protesters, as some of our other speakers will mention later. The scene of thugs carrying poles, harassing and assaulting peaceful protesters brought me and my colleagues back to a traumatizing flashback to the Hong Kong movement. In 2019, thugs actually in Hong Kong gathered outside a metro station with poles, exactly the same poles we saw on scene, to attack anyone who appeared to have come home from protesting peacefully against the government. These thugs in Hong Kong were later revealed to be actually related to the Chinese liaison office in Hong Kong. And by extension, they were actually directed by the Chinese Communist Party. While we are not able to establish any strong connection between the thugs we have seen with the Chinese embassy and Chinese consulate yet, connecting this incident visually actually was a horrifying revelation to me and my fellow colleagues who fled from Hong Kong. For us, the places we fled to are no longer safe. Wherever we flee, wherever we go, we're watched, we're harassed, and we're assaulted by the Chinese Communist Party. For example, Carmen Lau, an exiled district councillor, had her hair pulled and was also assaulted at the protest. Kennedy Wong, another member on our team, was pushed to the ground during one of the protests outside of the San Francisco International Airport. Over the past few years, we all decided not to return home in exchange for physical safety. I thought the United States was a safe haven for me to continue my advocacy work. But last month proved me all wrong. Right now, I'm very sorry to say that I no longer feel safe to be in the United States, and I no longer feel safe to continue doing my advocacy work. However, we will definitely continue with what we're doing, because if we are facing this level of harassment, imagine those who try to appear anonymous. Imagine those who try to hide their identities. They're facing even more severe harassment with nobody to go to. If transnational repression continues to happen on American soil to the extent we witnessed and experienced last month, I'm sure to say our communities will be dismantled by aggression and by fear soon. Therefore, I urge authorities to conduct a thorough and extensive investigation into the violence waged against us in a coordinated way. Congress should also pass policies to combat transnational repression as soon as possible. I thank the Chairman Smith and Senator Merkley for introducing the Transnational Repression Policy Act, and that must be passed swiftly in Congress. The violence in San Francisco was not only an attack on us, it was an attack on the fundamental values America is built upon. We should always have our First Amendment rights to speak freely without the fears of being assaulted and, of course, without the dangers of being kidnapped or assaulted. I wish to really feel sincerely safe and secure and genuinely feel safe here in the United States one day. But I'm sad to say that day seems to be sometime down the road, and we don't know when it is going to happen. And that wish extends to all my Hong Konger, Tibetan, Uyghur, and Chinese allies. I hope everyone can feel safe here in the United States for continuing our work, or otherwise we will slowly see the deterioration of people speaking up, and we will slowly see a descent of our communities here. And therefore, thank you for coming today. I really hope that we can put more focus on transnational repression in the next year and in the next, in the future years to come as well. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I would like to begin by thanking the team at the CECC for organizing this vital press conference. And thank you to Chairman Chris Smith and to all the members of the CECC for their enduring support of Tibet and tackling the issue of transnational repression head on. My name is Pema Doma, and I am the daughter of stateless Tibetan refugees. I am an indigenous human rights and climate activist, and I'm also the executive director of Students for Free Tibet. Last month, I was part of the group of cross-movement activists who were targeted by the reality of direct risks and violent repression that Tibetan, Uyghur, and Hong Kong activists protesting against dictator Xi Jinping in the free world. The reality is that these direct risks that we've experienced in San Francisco in APEC this past November has the potential to forever change the reality of activism of Tibetan, Uyghur, and Hong Konger young people and activists in very disturbing ways. I want to highlight several points that actually illustrate the disturbing ways I noticed the changes. On the day of dictator Xi's arrival to San Francisco, cross-movement activists organized a small handful of protesters to unwelcome Xi Jinping. On this day, after myself having attended state visits, the past 2 state visits of Xi Jinping here in the United States, I immediately noticed some things that were similar, which were hundreds of pro-CCP organized by the consulates there to welcome Xi Jinping. But something I noticed that was different was the level of intensity. While there was 500 to 800 in the past, there were now well over 1,000. And there were verbal harassments and there were altercations, which are never acceptable, but ones that I felt matched the level that we experienced in previous state visits of Xi Jinping. It felt familiar, which is very saddening to say, the level of harassment we had experienced that day. The next day, on November 15th, What I experienced was something I had never experienced before in my life as a Tibetan American who has spent majority of her life here in the United States. Tibetan students and youth activists also made social media videos documenting the harassment and shared it online, which was viewed hundreds of thousands of times by people from around the country. And one of these videos was about something which now we call as a car park incident, where 4 Tibetan students went to a public parking lot and held a banner in a nonviolent form of protest. The banner read, "Dictator Xi, your time is up," a message that millions of Tibetans and billions of Chinese would wish to tell Xi Jinping, but may not have the freedom to. Their hands were in a strap holding this banner nonviolently in a car park where there were a group of about 10 to 15 CCP, what seems like organized group, who violently pulled the banner in a jerking motion, almost causing several students, university students, to fall off the 5th floor of a building. I remember I was at the protest when my phone rang, and it was a 20-year-old Tibetan American student with a voice of fear and panic I have never heard in a young person. He said, "Acha Pema," which means older sister, Pema, "they just tried to pull us off the building. I don't know where everyone has gone. Everyone has been harassed by the CCP agents." It was a level of fear and intimidation I have never experienced a young person conducting activism and protest here in the United States to have experienced. Later that day, there were several incidents of violence and assaults. There were Tibetan young people who had cuts from being poked and stabbed by flagpoles, bruises, and there was a point in which the community had to decide whether or not young people and minors should be allowed to stay at a protest on a public street in San Francisco. And I felt at that moment that I knew that was the exact intention of targeting students. Many of the targeted individuals who were assaulted were minors. They were 15, 16, 17 years old. Some of them had sand thrown in their eyes while protesting. Others had their heads covered and hit with a flagpole several times. And these incidents happened throughout the night. An estimate of about 24 Tibetan students had been physically assaulted over the course of those days. And those assaults, I noticed, were not done against older members of the community or groups of Tibetan uncles or older men. It was all targeted towards young people, students, high school students, college students. And I immediately realized what the tactic of the CCP was. It was to create a sense of panic within the community that the youth would be targeted, and so therefore action must be taken. Maybe this protest would be unsafe for students or young people. I was very proud that night when the student activists, some of them as young as 16, discussed with their parents and decided they will stay at the protest regardless of the threats. And we as SFT, as Students for Free Tibet, and the other protest organizers quickly mobilized to create safety mechanisms that we can use to protect our own community, because as mentioned earlier, there was not much support provided by the San Francisco Police Department. I was very, very proud of the students who said, "I will not go home because that's what the CCP wants us to do." But I was also very disturbed to think that a 16-year-old high school student from San Francisco, a Tibetan American, had to decide that outside of the hotel where Xi Jinping is having dinner with Mark Casper, the CEO of Thermo Fisher, and other business leaders. The New York Times and other media outlets are sitting inside while 16-year-old Tibetans are outside having a meeting about whether they should choose to stay or go home for their own safety. That was an image I never imagined I would ever have to experience. At the end of the night, we created a plan for everyone to leave in groups because we had noticed increased thug activity. Again, when we were leaving, I received a phone call. It was from a group of young people, some of the youngest activists who were there at the protest. They had left in a group of 12 as instructed by the protest organizers, but they were followed by a group of thugs to the train station where they were walking. A group of about 10 thugs with metal poles, men in their 40s, were following them to the train station. And at that time, they called and said, "We don't know what to do. Do we go on the subway? Do we go inside? Where should we go? What do we do?" that level of fear to be felt amongst Tibetan American students here in the United States is something I have never experienced before. At that time, we told them to find a safe place with good lighting, and we brought many more older people, activists, and community members and organizers there to support them. And eventually, it came to the situation where taking the subway wasn't safe, because as groups broke off, as Caillou will explain later, we found a phenomenon where the Chinese CCP agents were targeting individuals and picking them off from the group as if they were prey to be intimidated. Later that day, we experienced the level of fear that was being felt by the communities of young people. Students that were reporting that when they cross the street, they're looking over their shoulder to see if they're being followed or not. They were constantly wondering whether or not they would be safe where they were going for the protests. But regardless of this, the Tibetan students that participated in these protests did not succumb to the fear. And they, in fact, were very brave as to collect photo and video evidence and share them online, which I mentioned that twice now because that was a very effective strategy by Tibetan students. And it was noticed by the CCP, which is why on the day of Xi Jinping's departure from San Francisco, we noticed another trend. 3 students on separate occasions three students and young people had their phones destroyed, stolen, or thrown into the water. 3 Tibetan students, and also Hong Kongers as well as Chinese dissidents have experienced the same experience as well. This mobilization shows that it's a very organized strategy. It's not randomized. When they see something happening on one day, they react the next day with a coordinated plan. And what we saw was thousands of dollars of personal items being thrown into rivers, stomped on with shoes. And on the day of the departure of Xi Jinping, I experienced one of a very, very harrowing experience that I would like to share with you guys as well. My role as the media liaison and the police liaison meant that I often wear clothes that don't distinguish me as a protester. And because of that, I was standing in a position where I saw there was 2 Tibetan students that had been attacked by a group of about 10 to 15 Chinese pro-CCP. The students are both 19 years old. They're children. And they were being attacked by a group of adult CCP males. And at that time, one of them had picked up their phone and called their mother in a final plea for help because she was at the protest. I had to watch as a Tibetan mother cried, her tears, her screaming that her sons were just there, 50 feet away, being beaten, and we couldn't see because they were using flags to cover and they were obscuring the scene. And at that time, I have never felt such disappointment as when the San Francisco Police Department told me, we cannot go there. You cannot go there. And they actually restrained the mother from going to her own child who was calling on the phone, begging for her help. That was an instance where I have never felt so powerless as a Tibetan American person. And it was one that truly haunts me to think that this level of transnational repression could take place, and in fact did take place in San Francisco in November of this year. So all of this transnational repression, it takes place because the messages that the students are sharing, that activists are sharing, are ones that dictator Xi and the CCP do not want the world to hear. So when you think about what were we saying outside of the hotel that night when Xi Jinping was having dinner with Mark Casper, we were raising awareness about the Chinese government's plans to steal the DNA of millions of Tibetan people and Uyghur people. And when you think about when we say the words free Tibet, and Tibet has never been a part of China, and you think about legislation such as the Resolve Tibet Conflict Act here in the United States Congress, these are the exact types of messages that the CCP is trying to obscure. So I would like to end by calling on all of the members of Congress as well as the CECC and the members of the media to continue amplifying those messages. On the quickest estimates, it appears that the Chinese government has spent over $500,000 on their project to silence the voices of Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, and Chinese dissidents at APEC Summit in November this year. This is the amount of resources that grassroots activists, 19-year-old students may not have, but we have the truth, we have our narratives, and we have our supporters and friends that are always going to continue their support for the causes and issues that we are raising. So the main call to action would be to support these legislations, like such as the Resolve Tibet Act, and to continue amplifying the voices of Tibetans calling for an end to colonial boarding schools, to the forced stolen DNA campaign inside Tibet by the CCP, as well as to take transnational repression seriously. Because as a Tibetan refugee, as a daughter of Tibetan refugees, we can see how the repression spreads from Tibet to Nepal and to further around the world. And when we don't say no, when we don't put an end to the transnational repression, it will continue growing and spreading in its intensity, its rigor, and its impacts on the communities affected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There you are.
Hello, everyone. First, I would like to thank Congressman Smith and also the friends at the CECC. My name is Elfidar Iltebir. I am the president of Uyghur-American Association. It's a non-profit, community-based organization. So we receive calls and emails daily from our community members asking what to do with a variety of different issues related to transnational repression. So I would like to talk about those general issues first and then talk about protests in San Francisco. As an American Uyghur, I would like to provide you with a glimpse into how the ongoing genocide in Uyghurs' homeland is affecting our daily life here in the United States. It is difficult enough to live with the pain of knowing that our relatives and friends are victims of ongoing genocide with physical torture, rape, and slavery in today's concentration camps, prisons, and forced labor camps. But China's state terror reaches far beyond any border. We are also victims of the CCP's harassment campaign right here inside this free country. It's brutal for the CCP to physically torture our families back home as a means of imposing psychological torture on us to force us not to speak out about its atrocities. China employs kidnappers' techniques, targeting us by taking loved ones hostage and attempting to force our compliance with its demands through fear of consequences on them for our actions. By delivering such threats and psychological torture, China breaks American laws with impunity. Millions of Uyghurs live in detention camps and in an open-air prison, the mass surveillance police state in our homeland, and we feel like the CCP is trying to imprison our minds and souls here in the United States. The world must stop the CCP's long arm from reaching so far beyond China and hold the CCP accountable for its crimes. China's extraterritorial harassment, including on American soil, has increased dramatically in recent years. While the U.S. has historically been a safe haven for refugees from the reach of tyrannical regimes, China persistently flouts U.S. laws and targets individuals, exiles inside the U.S., including some Uyghurs, with psychological torture by delivering threats against the safety of their relatives to silence criticism of its genocide. Uyghurs in the U.S. are being watched. For instance, a camp survivor, Zumrat Dawood, reported to the FBI that photos were taken of her at a store while she was shopping. Another camp survivor, Mihrigul Tursun, had to move her residence twice because some people were threatening her by a letter that was slipped under the door. Camp survivor Tursunay Ziaudun was harassed at the San Francisco airport protest by the pro-CCP counter-protesters. We know there are spies in the community who comply with China's threats out of fear for their loved ones, and they report what is happening within the Uyghur community. Most frequently, Chinese police visit Uyghur families and effectively hold them as hostage as they make them call their relatives here and tell us what to do and what not to do. By these means, the CCP's state terror reaches individuals inside the U.S. and exerts direct control over U.S. citizens here in spite of this being the land of the free. To our knowledge, the U.S. has never confronted these crimes committed on U.S. soil against U.S. citizens by prosecuting cases, expelling Chinese agents, summoning the ambassador, closing a consulate, or taking any sanctioning actions such as shutting down the WeChat as China's preferred delivery tool for its threats. As I witnessed in San Francisco, most of my friends talked about dinner day, the business events at APEC. I would like to talk about the airport protest a little bit. The day when we arrived, we took our spot on the streets where we are allowed to protest. And buses of Chinese students, and also, I believe, retirement house were also targeted because there were so many elderly Chinese people were there too. And we took our spot right in front of the exit of the airport and waited for Xi Jinping to arrive. However, when we get closer, Chinese protesters also went behind us and blocked in front of us, trying to be the first people and wave the flag to Xi Jinping when he gets out. So even there, they were occupying our protest, streets, our territory basically there. We were allowed to stay there. And they were trying to surround us and trying to block us so no one can see us. And we were very disturbed. As you know, Tursunay Ziyavudun was there too, and she had a doctor appointment, couldn't make it today. But she was literally followed by the Chinese protesters trying to block basically her flag or her voice. And this was very disturbing. This was very discouraging, very disappointed, because we also noticed all the streets, the barricades, there were a lot of money, the taxpayers' money spent to protect this genocidal Xi Jinping. And we were disappointed at that, as well as in the meeting, the U.S. business owners spent thousands of money to be with Xi Jinping. And all those kind of gives us the feeling of we are being unseen or unheard, despite of our fight, we are still being silenced here on the U.S. soil. Many bad harassment experiences we already talked about, but I want to end my speech that we need to stay strong and hopeful. In San Francisco, we were like brothers and sisters with Hong Kongers, with Tibetans, with even Chinese Democrats, and also all of us were like together standing against this oppressor. And with this fight, we are going to continue our fight like togetherness, with standing together till we all are free. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank CECC, and I also want to thank American people to give me the opportunity to tell my story. My name is Kaiju Zhang. On November 17, during the APEC Summit, I, 51 years old, and Mr. Zhou, 74 years old, and Mr. Li were ambushed and assaulted by Pro-CCP thugs in San Francisco International Airport. It occurred at about 1 p.m. when we were leaving the protest site to our car in Costco parking lot, which take about like a 10 minutes walk. When we were halfway, a dozen of young men blocked the sideway in front of us, gazing at us hostilely from far. After we passed them, they started follow us and was continuously throwing insults at us, such as "fuck you, Hong Konger," "fuck you, oh shit." I believe it was because they overheard us speaking Cantonese, and Hong Kongers are known for their anti-CCP positions, which fell into their category of attacking. I saw we were safe in America and should not succumb to any CCP intimidation. So I responded with such words as fuck CCP, fuck Xi Jinping. Sorry. These words were not aimed at any of these young men, but strangely, they were agitated by these anti-CCP words and immediately speed up and rushed to us. I was tackled down and was brutally beaten up. I lost consciousness very soon. After the assault, Mr. Zhou and I were sent to the hospital, and I stayed in the ER until the following day. Luckily, we recorded the entire incident with our cell phones. All the footage were passed to the police at the day of the assault. We also posted the footage on the internet. On November 24, an anonymous person informed me of the identity of one of the assailants. I immediately forwarded this information to the police. However, as of December 12, 25 days after the assault, I received no feedback from the police. Dear American people, I want to bring your attention to these facts regarding this assault. First, the assault occurred far away from the protest site. There were no confrontation with any pro-CCP supporters. We were intentionally targeted and was ambushed. Initially, a dozen of thugs were following us for a few minutes. When we arrived at the Costco gas station, another group of thugs, about like 3 thugs, headed toward us. They sandwiched us from rear and front and assaulted us. These two groups of thugs worked together to make sure we couldn't escape. It was a well-organized and well-coordinated assault. Second, the two groups of thugs were wearing red headbands and red scarves to identify their fellow thug members and to coordinate with each other. It was a professional action. Third, the thugs responded swiftly and violently to the anti-CCP words, which is disturbing. Hereby, I urge the police and the FBI to investigate any possible connection between the thugs and the CCP. Fourth, a reporter of KTSF News was assaulted by the same group of thugs just 1 hour before my assault. The reporter's cell phone was grabbed and thrown into the water. By our estimation, there were about 60 assaults against anti-CCP demonstrators during APEC Summit. However, no arrests were made. I flew from Shanghai to US this March to flee from the oppression of CCP. I thought I was safe and secure to voice my opinion in this country, but I was wrong. I have been angry about that. So many Chinese people have fled to America due to political suppression, but so few of them dare to speak out, even in the U.S. I was once angry with them, but now I understand why. Because the CCP's infiltration into American soil has reached an unbelievably alarming level. I'm aware that my speech will endanger my family in China, but still, I decided to stand up and speak out. I believe more and more people are going to gain courage from my action and start to rise. And I believe that democracy will prevail. The free world will prevail. God bless America. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I mean, such incredible courage, all of you. And the cause is so noble and just. So I want to thank you for speaking out, knowing that there are potential consequences. You've known what they are. You've come forward anyway. And that is just an amazing amount of courage and tenacity on your part, because you know someday China will be free. And when China is free, it'll be the people behind me and a few others like them who will be remembered as the heroes that made it happen. But, you know, very often I've chaired 83 congressional hearings on human rights abuse in China over the years. And almost always there's somebody from the Chinese embassy that comes and takes notes. I wonder if whoever that person might be today, if they could just stand up and we acknowledge who they are. Very often they don't like to stand up, but I hope you're taking this down, and I hope somewhere in your heart of hearts you realize the gross injustices that are being done by Xi Jinping each and every day. I mean, genocide, there's nothing worse than a genocide. And yet we've seen with the Tibetans an ongoing genocide. We see with the Uyghurs, which, you know, even Xi Jinping himself, according to data that was uncovered by the New York Times and others, said, show no mercy. And they have shown no mercy whatsoever towards innocent and wonderful people who are now the object of genocide by Xi Jinping and all the others, Hong Kong, everywhere. There needs to be real change, systemic change, and these are the people that are calling for it. And we are writing the Attorney General. We're trying to get our bill passed, which I think will, you know, not only require reports and training, but, you know, there needs to be a prioritization of making sure that you are safe here and you're not having somebody following you or breaking into your home or doing some other horrible thing with violence and theft and other things. So thank you. Are there any questions? For any of the... Pierre, do you want to say anything? For close. Pierre Tazi is our Chief of Staff and General Counsel. He also speaks fluent Chinese.
Well, not quite fluent, but for those who speak Chinese, 大家好. Okay. No, thank you very much. All of you are very, very brave, and you do a great service. Certainly not only for the Commission and for the Congress, but for the American people. I think there is a need to wake up, and I think, as we heard, it's exactly right. What happened in San Francisco, we know what happens in China is terrible. Some of the most egregious human rights abuses, forced organ harvesting, and the marking of people for their DNA. I can't think of anything more horrific. But when that tyranny and oppression comes to our shores, and that we have members of our political and business class that turn the other way, that is something that is I think, very disheartening. But all of you here are testament to the bravery and the courage that can, I think, really wake people up. I do believe there are some folks from the embassy here, so 欢迎你们. You know, this is a free country and people are free. So yeah, enjoy our freedoms, and we hope that one day it will come to a democratic China as well. So thank you very much.
Sorry to put you on the spot. Yes.
I wanted to add one small details that I witnessed at San Francisco airport protest. We were screaming free Uyghur, free Tibet, free Hong Kong with our voice. But the Chinese trolls brought big speakers. They didn't even shout the slogans. They just played the speakers that says 欢迎, 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 which is welcome, welcome. So how fake it is there, they're still playing the games of propaganda and silence us even there. But we made sure, that Xi Jinping saw our flags, our voice as well. So I just wanted to add how small detail.
Thank you. Oh, good. That's right. Let me ask you.
I'm not sure I need a microphone. Dean Bastido, Optimum Publishing, Toronto. I, am again heartened by this display of bravery of all of you coming here today to speak what is taking place in San Francisco and what we see as an ongoing campaign around the world to suppress freedom and democracy and those that wish to seek that and religious freedom. My question for you, Congressman Smith, is we see this display here. What other actions can Congress take? How can we bring this and elevate this to the White House and actually make this a seminal moment for us to fight back against?
Great question. It's been my sense of disappointment ever since Tiananmen Square, how there is a whole elite that thinks if you just trade more, somehow China will matriculate from a dictatorship to a democracy. I remember back in 1994, May 26 to be exact, Bill Clinton de-linked human rights from trade, MFN in particular. And had that remained in effect, that they don't get, they being the Chinese Communist Party, most favored nation status. They are an exporting economy. Without that, their goods would not be viable on our shelves here or in any way affordable. We would have had a different China today. May 26, 1994, he ripped up the executive order where serious and sustained progress had to be made in human rights or else all would be lost. And we lost an opportunity unlike any other. I did a press conference that day. C-SPAN carried it. You ever want to watch it? And everything I said, and I'm no prophet, but everything I said is come true. Where they've gotten stronger militarily and every other way. Their police have been exponentially enhanced by our capabilities that have been sold. The surveillance state, which is being, Fisher, what they have done to sell them the ability to surveil just about everybody, and that was mentioned earlier today. It's just outrageous. So we have a number of bills, bipartisan bills. I got a bill passed, and Tom Cotton's the prime author on the Senate side, on the despicable issue of forced organ harvesting, where average age 28-year-olds, tens of thousands every single year, mostly Uyghur and Tibetan, although others, are put down on a gurney. They take their organs, 2 to 3 of their organs. The Chinese Communist Party then either sells them or it becomes, what goes to their own elite in the CCP who might need a liver or something else. So they get the most healthiest people and the most hated by the Chinese Communist Party, and they steal their organs and kill the unwilling donor in the process. Our bill passed with only 2 negative votes, 413 to 2, passed in March. It's sitting over in the Senate. Still has not gotten a vote. We need to up our game and prioritize human rights abuse in China and to be very serious about it. And this would met out sanctions across the board on people who knowingly procure those organs, because people do travel to Shanghai and elsewhere to get organs. Well, they need to know the source of it. And this is just one example of a human rights abuse that needs to be. We've got a bill that would not resolve it, but it would go a great step forward in trying to end that egregious practice. This transnational issue, where is the FBI? Why aren't they doing more? This goes way back when Rabia Kadir came in. First place she went was to my hearing room and talked about all of her family back in Xinjiang were being horribly hurt. They still are. And she personally here was being dogged by the Chinese Communist Party. Same way with Chen Guangzhen, the great blind activist who also had, run-ins with the Chinese Communist Party police and many, many other dissidents and other diaspora members. So, the idea, as was said by many of our folks here, that they go after the families, how despicable is that? Radio Free Asia, a lot of their correspondents have found that their families are being retaliated against in China. That's why I mean it. Xi Jinping should be at The Hague for crimes against humanity and for committing genocide. And the international community, all they want is more trade, more money. Money's okay. I'm a capitalist too, but not at the expense of these wonderful people who are being so maltreated. So we need to reprioritize the human rights issue. I went in 1994 when we were pushing the MFN linkage with human rights, and I met with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Beijing. I met with a lot of other people, but this was the most memorable thing on that trip. And all these top people from all the big businesses from the United States of America were in this meeting. There were all these commerce people from the State Department there. One very low-level human rights officer at the embassy, very low level. I think he was there for a couple months. And all of them tell me how religious freedom flourishes there. One says, my secretary goes to Mass. I'm a Catholic, so he knew that. Every week I said, yes, to the Patriotic Church. And at the Patriotic Church, how many are there in all of Beijing, and how repressed are they? And they're even more repressed now under synthesization by Xi Jinping, where everything comports with him, and that's every faith imaginable. But they're all talking about how, things will get so much better if we just trade. I said, no, a dictatorship will become stronger. And, when Bill Clinton, I don't want to, focus on this too much, when he brought in Cha Tien, the operational commander of Tiananmen Square, and the guy who said, let's send in the tanks and the bayonets. And then he goes to the Army War College right here in Washington and says, nobody died at Tiananmen Square. That was in 1986. I put together a hearing in 2 days, had all these wonderful people who were there on the scene, including the Time magazine correspondent who said lots of people died. But back home in China, People's Daily, everywhere else, big headlines about Cha Tien taking Washington by storm. We got to end this complicity and this enabling, however unwitting on the parts of some. And what happened at APEC has to be like another major pivot point for all of us. Our FBI, our Justice Department needs to get on this and on this now. And we'll be doing a bipartisan letter. We are doing it right now to request that from Garland. You just got to, these are the most heroic people imaginable. And the Chinese Communist Party wants to hurt them, or hurt their families, or worse. So I think there needs to be a pivot. The APEC kowtowing on the part of our business community was outrageous, and it's got to stop. I have a bill in to reinstate MFN with trade. That has a very heavy lift ahead of it. And we have another bill, just so you know. Everybody wants EVs. We're all going to buy electric vehicles. Well, I've had 2 hearings on it. One as chairman or co-chair of the Lantos Commission, and then one in our great China Commission just a few days ago, about all the cobalt coming from DR Congo, and I've been to DR Congo. I've been to Kivus and Goma, where this stuff is mined by children, African children. 35,000, one estimate. Some is 25,000, but it's probably closer to 35,000. Kids going into mines, dying, getting sick, and about 200,000 adults. All of that cobalt goes from DR Congo to China. Process there, comes here. This would make it inadmissible, similar to what we did with the into the United States. We'd have a rebuttable presumption that says we assume it's been made by child labor and slave labor, so it doesn't come in unless you can prove otherwise, just like the Uyghur Forced Labor Act. And we've had hearings on that. Scott knows. Just so you know how great our staff is. Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, who thought of that idea? That guy over there. Yeah, thank you. What a difference that made. That was in 2014. And the China hands told us don't worry, Hong Kong will never be a problem. And he was ahead of the game, and we put the bill in, never got passed until like 4 years later. So we've got to pivot, and hopefully the APEC Summit is the beginning of that major pivot, at least right now, protect these wonderful people.
Members of the media, if you want to do individual interviews, we have the room for another 45 minutes, so you can set up in the well here. If you want to talk to individuals or talk to the member, Mr. Smith, you can do that for the next 45 minutes. Thank you very much.
And again, I'll just add before we go to the next question. After we passed the law, a bill is pending over on the Senate side on the forced organ harvesting, the Chinese embassy went nuts and said it's untrue. And I said, fine, let's talk about it, because it is true. And then I said, I'd like to go to Xinjiang and lead a congressional delegation there, because they said in the article, we have nothing to hide, there's no problem. There's nothing going on like you say is going on. I have written letters that if there is somebody from the embassy, take it back. I want to go, and I'll lead a delegation there. And we will ask hard questions, but we will be fair, and we'll go. I still haven't gotten a yes on that one. Yes.
Hi, Mr. Smith.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
连续多年进行请愿。
Well, we have petitioned in the Chinese embassy here for several years.
因为中国的地方政府的腐败，包括中央政府的很多部门的腐败，对中国公民的人权的践踏是非常显然的。
Well, related to the corruption both in the local China government and the central Chinese government.
去年我们在2022年的5月份，在大使馆的官邸，就是秦刚没有回到中国之前进行请愿。
Last May in 2022, we have petitioned to Qin Gang's residence while he was still the how to say.
他和他的情人傅小田打网球的时候，我们的访民看到了，拍照了。
Well, we petitioners actually take photos with Qin Gang playing tennis with his mistress Fu Xiaotian.
他的公使助理徐学渊。
The number second of Chinese embassy, Xu Xueyuan, the consul Xu Xiaoyuan came out.
打我们的访民，而且抢手机。
Beat our petitioners and robbed our cell phones.
他不仅不承认他自己犯罪，而且呢，利用外交的权利向美国政府、国务院的安保司和特勤局、总统卫队特勤局撒谎，公然的撒谎。
Of course, Xu Xueyuan didn't admit that she has committed a crime, but she also lied to the Secret Service and the Department of State about this incident.
他把一个中国公民说成是攻击他、抢夺他的东西，最后把中国公民押入到华盛顿的监狱。
Consul Xu Xueyuan lied that she was attacked by a Chinese petitioner. Actually, that caused that petitioner being arrested.
在美国的访民一起来声援这个访民。
Okay, other Chinese petitioners also came out to support that one who was.
结果大使馆的安保和他们雇佣的安保，以及他们雇佣的黑社会一起，几十个人打我们50、60岁的老人，7、8个人，他们40、50人。
Well, there were several dozens security guards and thugs hired by the Chinese embassy who attacked us. We were only 7 or 8 petitioners there.
特勤局和国务院安保司偏袒他们。
The Secret Service and the security in the Department of State sided with the Chinese embassy.
访民好几个被抓，我一会儿是问题，先说事实。
Several Chinese petitioners were arrested.
我们抗议，
because of our protest.
但是国务院安保司依然袒护他们。好几个公民李焕军、艾芙蓉先后被抓，艾芙蓉有一次被关押了2个月。
Several Chinese petitioners have been arrested. For example, Mr. F. was detained 2 months here.
地西法院对访民进行过多次的审判，都是无罪。
Oh, there were also several trials by the court here in D.C. who actually found those petitions not guilty after the trial.
但是大使馆的安保打我们访民，国务院没有一声抗议。
But the Department of State here has not protested at all to the Chinese embassy who beat those Chinese petitioners.
我们要求美国国会监督国务院、监督特勤局， 执法公正。
Okay, we hope that U.S. Congress could oversight could monitor the Department of State.
我们不允许他们践踏美国的宪法和中国人的人权。
We don't want the Chinese embassy could repress human rights here.
但是我们不知道他们是谁。今年在旧金山的这个12号，我一下飞机到现场就被中国大使馆的官员叫范朱鹏攻击。
Well, last month, November 12th, once I arrived in San Francisco, I was attacked by a Chinese embassy staff called Fan Zhupeng.
我当时问美国的警察，美国的警察不愿意告诉我，但是在我的强烈要求下，我到了他当地的这个刑事鉴定科学中心，也拿不到。最后，通过其他的渠道，终于知道这个人叫范朱鹏，是公安部派驻大使馆的安保头子。
Well, at that time, I asked San Francisco police to identify this attack, but I got nothing. Sometime later, I got from another source that the identity of this guy called Fan Zhupeng. Actually, he was sent by the Department of Public Security from China to the Chinese embassy.
李焕军在当地也被打。李焕军在钻过拜登车下也被打。我的问题就是什么时候惩罚他们？什么时候驱逐徐学渊
Yeah, my question is when would the U.S. government expel that counselor Xi Jinping who have committed such crimes?
因为他们在这里不应该有特权。
Well, they should not enjoy the immunity here. Thanks.
谢谢议员，谢谢大家。
You raised excellent questions. We will follow up on all of it. There is a sense of impunity that they enjoy, and I think that's outrageous. And when you were attacked, was it at the embassy or was it at your home? It was at the embassy. Good, okay. I've been outside the embassy too, many times for protests, and so that's terrible. You should be free from violence. Yes.
史密斯先生，大家好。我是中国的访民维权者、异议人士，到达美国已经接近4年了。
This is Jie Li Jian from Los Angeles. He has been in the United States 4 years.
我在美国这边，我在国内受到迫害，受到被抓捕，抓捕精神病医院关了52天，然后电针，然后酷刑，强迫吃药，强迫去给我去禁锢，然后我是2019年12月24号到达美国。
He arrived in American 2014 because he was being put into a psychiatric hospital because his political actions.
到达美国以后，在中国，然后我从事这种民主抗争，我不怕。到达美国有这种自由，我更应该为那些还没有出来的，已经被迫害一些受到伤害，甚至失去生命的，为他们去发声，为我家这个惨案去发声。
So he continues his advocacy here because he feels like this is a land of free. He can speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves back in China. So he has been very active organizing the protests in United States against CCP.
在这边这近几年，我组织了最少有100多场民主活动，与藏人、香港、维吾尔族、缅甸及这个柬埔寨人，我们共同举办了很多民主的一个活动。
He has organized almost in over 100 protests in last 4 years. Some with the Chinese community, some with Uyghurs, Tibetans, Vietnamese, and other.
那么在美国，我起初以为是安全的，但是我做了这种事情以后， 我觉得我的危险，那么中共这种海外警察跨国镇压迫害就在我的身边，在我们很多包括周峰卓老师，我们很多为民主发声的朋友身边。
Initially, he thought he's safe here, but then quickly he realized that he is being followed, under surveillance, like others in the community.
这个是保国卫士给我当时的一个记录，详细记录了我的这个被习近平迫害的52天。
This is a record of his persecution back in China.
在2021年至2022年100天，我3次被受到这种伤害，2次车祸，1次刀扎。
He was physically attacked here in United States many times last few years, including knife attack.
这个警方 FBI 已经多次报备了，但是现在案件也没有一个进一步。
He reported to FBI and police, but so far there's no progress in finding the perpetrators.
这是我们的活动期间对我们监视，然后骚扰。
These are the people who harassed him or followed him at the protests.
这是我们纪念64的时候，然后骚扰威胁。
This is another person who attacked them at the Tiananmen commemoration. And he showed that he has a gun with him to threaten us.
这是我们抗议习近平当时我们洛杉矶的一个活动，我是这边的组织者，然后我们100多人去往旧金山去和平抗议习近平的造访。
This was when he was organizing anti-Xi Jinping protest with more than 100.
这是他们殴打我们的现场，然后把我这里打破了，这个。
Yeah, he suffered from a broken finger right here. So this, you can see it right here. This describe what happened with the picture. Yeah, because he was carrying an American flag with him. Yeah. These are the pictures sent to him with bullets and a gun to threaten his life. He was attacked in San Francisco many times, but he was arrested and charged during San Francisco protest. He's the only one so far San Francisco police arrested. Okay. Good. He believed in justice in the United States. He believed he will be innocent, acquitted by the court. Thank you for your support here.
Well, okay. So just going to wrap it up then. Well, thank you, everyone. And if there are more requests from the press for interviews with either Mr. Smith or with our folks here, so why don't we? Why don't you come? All right. Yeah, we're going to wrap it up now. But if people want to speak, please, or to do individual interviews.
Yeah, Dee, please.
I have a question talking about the inaction of this Didi Tang with the Associated Press. So the question is about the inaction by the local police. I think it's like both San Francisco Police Department and the South San Francisco Department. How would you explain the inaction? Because even to me, without transnational, repression, right? This is like personal assault. I mean, just kind of puzzled. It's puzzling why the police haven't done anything. And you're talking about they were taking instruction from above. Can you elaborate?
Well, I don't know that. That's why we would ask the Attorney General to investigate. There needs to be a thorough, serious investigation. Who gave the order to stand down? I mean, I know I have family in law enforcement. My son's a detective. I have a great respect for law enforcement, and they don't look the other way. But when they're ordered by someone, and I'm not sure who that someone is, that's when you get very negative consequences like we've seen here. So that would be the request, to do a thorough investigation, find out why all of these wonderful people who are peacefully protesting were hit with poles, have scars now that will not go away, and there's also psychological scars when you're beaten by these thugs. And so we're demanding that. We're not just asking, we're demanding that they do this. And the State Department has been notoriously weak on human rights vis-a-vis China, and I find that to be appalling. You do not get progress in human rights unless you're serious. I met with Wei Jingsheng, remember the great Democracy for All activist, right after he was let out briefly in the early 1990s to get Olympics 2000. He was such a high level. I was in Beijing. We had dinner together, and he told me something I'll never forget. And they rearrested him after that and almost killed him. And then he came and testified before my committee, first place he went after he healed. But he said, you Americans don't get this. When you kowtow and you're weak and vacillating, they beat us more in the prisons. When you're tough, predictable, you look them in the eyes and they know you're not kidding, they beat us less. I've heard that from other political prisoners as well. But Wei, couldn't have been clearer. And our whole policy, frankly, has been one of looking the other way or not being as strong as we could have been and should have been. And now, when people are being assaulted in the streets, when they're non-violently protesting, and these bullies come out with poles, reminiscent, as was said by our witnesses, our guests today, that were absolutely reminiscent of Hong Kong. It was like a page out of Hong Kong when they repressed people there. We need to get very, very serious and protect transnational attacks like this are just, it's bad enough they do it there. And we have linkages to human rights and trade and other things we need to do. But here, it's outrageous. So we're asking, the Attorney General, he needs to do this immediately. That's why we're having this meeting now, or this press conference. The idea is to pivot and say, we hope that something would be different about this. It's not. They stood down, and they were ordered. I have no doubt about it in my mind.
I want to quickly add a detail in. So when these thugs were attacking, our people were taking pictures, and they were smirking at the phone. Knowing that they will get away with it. That's the kind of invincibility these CCP supporters are feeling. It definitely is some kind of agreement. That they feel that they are enabled to do it. Between the United States and Chinese government in accommodating Xi Jinping, the dictator, when he visits.
Otherwise, it's inexplicable. Police know how to do their job, and they would do their job if they weren't told not to. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.